today's episode of Decisions Now. I'm your host, Erin Pearson, and I'm very excited because today we have Vivek Anand, who's the Director of Advanced Analytics at Gap with us today. Vivek, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm particularly excited about some of the stuff that we have coming up in today's episode because I think in particular when we're talking about some brands like a Gap or just retail brands in general, there's a lot that you don't even know that goes into it when you are the consumer and you're the shopper as well. So I'm particularly excited about some of the topics that we have. Just to jump right in, so you've been at Gap for about a year now, and you're doing some really cool work in data science. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is? And you had mentioned previously that specifically you're doing a lot for solving for demand, and that's a very complex process involving many teams within the company as well. So can you just talk through how do you find and solve these questions for them?
Yeah, sure thing. So in context of like fashion retail, like demand forecasting becomes a unique problem, if you will, partly because of this continuous nature of products that we introduce. Like you walk in store every month, you will see like completely different store, right? So often enough, we have to like predict or forecast demand for something for which we have like little or no sales history. And that's the uniqueness of retail. Like in general, stuff is new, continuously coming into the stores, and you have to predict demand for it. So for this one, and pretty much every data science project that we have on our side, we sort of follow a very systematic and collaborative approach. And first and foremost is to understand the business landscape. So typically, as a data scientist, we are usually insulated from the business. So it's very important to understand what we are trying to solve for. So we try to collaborate with like our stakeholders, and those stakeholders could be from like merchandising, planning, store operations, and like different teams who are involved in it. We work with them to kind of understand like what their pain points are, like what are we actually trying to solve for. Like, yes, it's demand is like one word problem, but like it's a bigger problem. So we try to understand the business landscape. We try to get the expertise from different stakeholders to get a sense of like the problem at hand. What are the business constraints? What are the business nuances that need to be baked into the solution? So that is really the most important part. Mm-hmm. And then after we have done that part, we sort of like go into our own wheelhouse from a data scientist standpoint. We look at the data. We try to understand, curate the data, and really try to assess, validate what we heard from our stakeholders. Like many times, like not just at Gap, like but elsewhere as well. Like people come up with some sort of like I call it urban legends. Like, hey, this is what happens in our business, but when you look at the data, you see something completely different, right? So we try to understand the data. We try to validate some of the assumptions or like business constraints, guardrails that have been given to us, and then we really go into like model building exercise. Now, model building exercise really depends on the nature of data we have. So we try to get data from like sales, customer, like similar sales, product similarity, because like products are new. And also like external data like seasonality and things like that. And once we have that data, we will go into like our EDA, we'll go into our like looking at the trends in the data that we have. And then finally, we go into the model selection and development phase. Now, model selection, the choice of model really depends on the data we have at hand and the problem we're trying to solve for. So most important thing is like demand, for example, given the nature of the problem, like I said previously, traditional time series forecasting doesn't work. You will have to rely on like advanced machine learning techniques, reinforcement learning techniques to like come up with a solution to this problem. And we'll just go through a host of modeling options depending on the problem, like I said, and we'll continue like validating, testing, back testing on historical data, on historical products that we had sold for which we have like a good amount of data. And then once we have landed like a candidate model, then we go into like model validation testing, making sure that like, hey, how's the accuracy when tested on historical data? Because that's the best metric for us to test. We also somehow, in some cases, we can, like, depending on the model, we can do some version of simulation, like have a chain event, like, hey, you started here, and then you forecast it depending on sales. Because in our business, like there's a lot of complexity. Like you forecast something, you get it wrong, then you have a lot of liable inventory sitting somewhere. So you have to effectively simulate all the moving pieces and see like how well did you do. And then once we have the model validation testing, then we sort of collaborate with second set of stakeholders that we have working with like MLOps, IT teams to scale the model, make it scalable, automated, and make it like available real time. In that process, the other thing that we like many teams, like not at Gap, but like elsewhere I've seen is like they just lose track of what we call like a model drift. Model was built to do something. It like 2 years down the line, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So you have to account for that drift and make sure that model continues to behave the way it is supposed to. So that model monitoring needs to be in place as well. So we work with, like I said, stakeholders on IT and DevOps and MLOps to productionalize the model, scale the model, make it really available real time, and monitor the drift of it. And then throughout this entire process, it's very important to have like an open line of communication with our brand stakeholders, like our end customers, not like people going to the stores, but like people who we are trying to solve their problems for. And the important thing there is like making sure that, hey, did I understand your business constraints, guardrails, rules, nuances correctly? I can like, if I understand something wrong and do not spot check, sniff test with our stakeholders as we go, then it's usually we end up in a not so nice place. So we continuously sort of talk to our stakeholders and then make sure that what we're building aligns with what they're expecting or like solves their pain points, if you will.
Yeah. I think that's great. What you had just said, especially at the end there, the concept applies no matter who your stakeholder is, if it's internal or external, but it's essentially the concept of like the 5 whys, right? It's you have to ask, why are you doing this 5 times before you actually get to the real pain point, and to make sure that you're solving for the actual problem that they have, not just the, as you called it, I think the urban legend that they might be saying on the surface. So communication is key. I think it's a skill that's oftentimes undervalued across the board, but no matter what your job is, engineering, sales, marketing, whatever, communication is what needs to happen.
More so in our space, it's almost like one of the most underappreciated skills, which is like the most important, in my opinion, one of the most important.
So another area that you mentioned working with is within user-generated data, like such as like search engines. So how is AI involved in this process with the search engines or even computer vision? And then with the increase of generative AI over this past year, where do you see that this could be applied to take this even further?
Oh yeah. I mean, search data, like it can be like organic search on your own website, or it could be like a search trend on Google or whatever. It's like an invaluable source of critical information, really, for us. And it can provide information on multiple dimensions. It could be on like customer, on product dimension, on like even website functionality, really. So, I mean, this search data can be like used to understand customer preferences and then like really develop new products. So basically, like a good example is if you just analyze the search queries, you will sort of get a good sense of retail trends. Like, for example, people are looking for like, let's just say pink floral dress. And then it can like get you a sense of like, hey, this is the in design, this is what is trending. And do I have that in my assortment? Is there a product gap on my offerings? So that like search data, if analyzed correctly, you can even like try to understand what is the trend, what people are looking for, and what I'm offering. Is there a gap, and try to fill that gap. And it essentially like it can make your process to bring new products, which are like in style, in stock pretty quickly, effectively by analyzing the emerging fashion trends in effectively real time, right? Yeah. It can also kind of help you sort of stay ahead of competition by just adapting to customer preferences, incorporating popular trends. To your point about Gen AI, it can be a source of inspiration for new product development. Actually, I know like somewhere people are using these things to develop new products, and you can, like I talked about, like identifying gaps. There are like courses on websites like Coursera or Udemy. I don't remember which one, but which essentially tells you like how could you use like a Gen AI app like Midjourney to create new designs and like have your own business. So, for example, I forget which brand it was, but like essentially there was a search I used the word pink floral dress. Someone created a design which was effectively what a vendor was selling. So probably they are relying on GenAI to create those products. So it's a new like a realm, but like I can clearly see it's how it does on the product dimension. Search can also be useful for identifying customer behavior. So basically, like if you are tracking, I mean, for the most part, if for any e-commerce or like a company that does business online, there is a way for you to identify who the customer is. There are multiple ways, vendors who do that. And then like just tracking the click stream, you can identify what kind of product that person is in. And then you can generate tailored product recommendations, promotions for that particular customer that enhances their customer experience, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing which is quite important and underappreciated is making it easy for people to find stuff on your website, right? Just following the clickstream data and search data, like what people search and where they went on the website, it sort of helps you even optimize your website, just making it easy for people to search what you're offering on your website in like a relatively low amount of time, and then just reduces the abandoned cart or like disrupted sessions, if you will. So, I mean, search, like I said, it provides information on product, customer, website functionality, like multiple dimensions. It just gives you a lot of unstructured data, but like used correctly, it has a huge potential for sure.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think Amazon is the classic example of this, right? Is like being able to see what is somebody searching, and then they personalize the different results. And I would have to imagine within Gap or other retail companies as well, whether it's being personalized to the individual or to a region as well. I mean, even when you go into like brick and mortar stores, I get the sense that every now and again they change up where they're positioning different things, not only based on where people go, but also to make sure that they find new items. And so that then they can start finding them, buying them, and making more revenue streams off of these new items. Just because, if you walk in, if you always go in the same direction, you're going to buy the same things. You switch it up on somebody and they're going to find something new.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's not that you're thinking, it's actually happened. So there is a study where there was a theory that women buy card more than men. And then what they started doing is they ran an experiment. I don't remember what this was like in some different country, probably in the UK. There's a study on it. I can share this out. Basically, what they started doing is putting a greeting card next to the beer aisles, and men buying greeting cards started increasing. So just moving stuff around, you can just increase your revenue stream, like you said.
Yeah, it's smart, and you have to figure out where your buyer's going, where are they looking.
Yeah, the mind association rules for product placement and even cross-selling, like Amazon you mentioned, you can, like, if you're buying a monitor, it will say, oh, do you want a cable or like a HDMI cable or something? It's just all data science in the background.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I will say I'm definitely a sucker for data science. I will definitely buy some of those personalized items. So one of the things that we've talked about a bit is measuring the impact of all of this can be traditionally quite hard. As you mentioned, like there's a lot of unstructured data that goes into it. So not everyone is able to like use it very well. So what is your process for making sure that it does get used and for measurement as a whole?
Yeah, sure thing. So, I mean, like typically it's fashion, like, again, I alluded to it in the past. So like our outcomes are like from a data science model or something that's just like very intangible nature of outcomes, right? I do a wrong demand forecast here in time, like, and its impact will be felt like 2 months down the line because I placed a wrong item in wrong quantities in the wrong store, right? So those things can happen. So like it becomes more challenging. So like there are multiple ways we kind of do that, right? So first thing is, like, if I'm trying to solve a problem, let's just say I'm saying like, hey, I'm doing demand forecast, then I need to be able to, if done correctly, you should have fewer lost sales, you should have fewer stranded inventory, you should have better sell through and things like that, right? So what we do is we typically track relevant KPIs before the intervention or like the model that we have introduced, and after, like, and just track like how it is trending with the solution. That's like the most simple thing that we can really do. And again, like I said, if my solution is right, it should impact the bottom line and the associated KPIs. In the model building exercise, we typically use metrics like root mean square error, mean absolute percentage, just standard statistical metrics to understand like how good the model is performing on the historical data. I can build the model on a data set and then test it on a set of data it has not seen. Like it's in traditional data science, we call it like test and train split. So you train the model on a set of data and test it on like this set of data on which the model has not been trained. It is unseen to the model, and see like how well it is performing. So we do those things as well. The other thing that we measure the value is like having a sort of controlled study A/B test of sorts. So for example, you want to change to your example, like, hey, I want to change the outlay of the store. I want to like rearrange the store in a certain way. Then you can have a similar store where you do not make that change, and in another store you make that change. So basically you're controlling for, since the stores are very similar statistically, all the things are similar, and the only thing that you're changing is the layout, right? In that case, that's the live A/B test. We will see like, okay, I had an intervention, everything was the same. What is the difference in outcome? So you can like measure the lift from that and the statistical significance of it, which sort of lets us say like, hey, with a certain degree of confidence that we did it right, or like, hey, this did not yield results kind of thing. And often enough in our line of work where like the results of our predictive models or our solutions are not just a point in time, they happen over a time horizon. We sort of have a simulation where we'll just try to simulate or mimic how the analytic would play out in the real world, where we try to mimic different components that affect. So for example, again, using demand forecast, I have demand forecast, I will look at how much of inventory I have, how much of it I sent to store, or how much of it sold, how much of it lost sales. So we will simulate this over a long time horizon and see like what would be the benefit or what was the observed benefit because of the simulation. So typically like standard, like I said, error metrics, simulation, A/B tests, which are like pretty big, not just in like retail, but like even in online business and Facebooks and Amazons as well. And then just tracking the relevant KPIs. Like your A/B test can give you that, hey, you have a XYZ lift, but if your KPIs are not tracking that, well, probably the test was not very accurate. So it's a combination of all those things.
Yeah. That makes sense. To I guess it depends on what we're measuring and the timelines that you're working on too for all of
Exactly.
this. Yeah.
Exactly.
So prior to Gap, you were working at the Zilliant data science team, and you launched the AI system around pricing that was specific to B2B. I think a lot of the people that we have listening today are in the B2B space as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what was the driving need?
Yeah, absolutely. Like at Zilliant, like as like I led the data science, North American data science team as director of science there. And we sort of like undertook the development and launch of AI powered systems. So basically, like 5 years ago or 7 years ago, when AI was starting to like take off, there was especially in B2B space where like decisions were made in isolation. There was no data culture, if you will, in like, or like data culture was lacking. I should not say not, it was not there. In traditional B2B industries, essentially the solution that we did was specifically tailored to them. And B2B, to your point, like what was the need of it? B2B is very different from traditional retail. Traditional retail, usually you will have like sort of fixed prices, fixed promotions, which everyone can see and now, right? You walk in the store, you see the same price. You go to the website, you see the same price that I see, right? In B2B, those prices are very opaque. You will be pressed to find like a lumber manufacturer that will give you a price. They'll say like, hey, call us and get the price. and in that case, like the pricing is dependent not just on like when you are calling, it's dependent on like multiple hosts of factors. It could be who you are, where are you calling from, who is your end customer, and it involves a lot of individual negotiation depending on the selling situation. Every unique selling situation results in a different price. Mm-hmm. And these might seem like, hey, this is just too subjective. It's really not. And our solution was able to bake those into the solution and build a pricing solution. Also, the other thing about B2B is like, unlike traditional retail, the data generation, the amount of data is generated is very low. There are like hundreds of thousands of transactions compared to millions, right? So the scale or amount of data that you generate is very low. And that essentially plays into the part where like, hey, just put a ton of data into the model, have the reinforcement learning method, learn it. That is not possible. You have to get creative using data science with limited amount of data, and that's where like novelty and ingenuity came from there. And the pricing decisions, like I said, were like really dependent on contextual factors. Like, for example, and this is, I have seen this across industries, across multiple verticals. Things are usually more expensive in New York or California compared to Florida. It can be anything. Just pick something like pumping supplies. They're cheaper in Florida just because there's so many competition. Anything. Like, I mean, I'll not go into examples. Who the end customer is. Like I've worked with a customer who used to sell something that gets used in food for us, you and I, baby food and pet food. Exactly same thing. Depending on who the end customer is, the price is different. The human, like, oh, you have many options. You can just buy it from anyone. So the prices are lower. Pet food and baby food are like 3 times, 4 times the multiplier for like adult food. So it's very contextual, and you have to like build rules or learning mechanisms to that kind of like parse this context and then like applying into the pricing algorithm. So these were the needs that drove it, and eventually we got to a solution that could understand these things, was not data hungry, and we were able to use like advanced machine learning techniques. Like I said, we're not data hungry, and then get to a point where we were able to contextualize these, build a system that could understand these nuances and provide a pricing.
I mean, it's certainly very interesting. I think, I mean, you go into anything from, what brand name of something do you buy, or if something is personalizing the price for you, or what time of day are you shopping, anything can adjust the price on you a bit. Yeah. So
well, there's a concept called dynamic pricing, which like exists in both retail and B2B. It really depends on like what time of day you're buying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, there's a lot that goes into that. So since we're talking about pricing serves as obviously like a crucial area of all businesses, and it's a means to an end to achieve most of the goals, and that's typically either increased revenue or increased profits. So when you've been working with businesses, how are they navigating the decision-making process in terms of optimizing between the two, or can they do both at the same time?
That is a great question, actually. Like a lot of people who start on this journey, they sort of, I'm not sure like what are they trying to solve for. They're like, hey, I just need a price for this. But the price, like you said, it's a means to an end, right? It's not an end in itself. So basically, you can optimize for profit. So just increase your price and you'll have higher profit, or you can have like lower price and you'll have more sales and your revenue will be higher. So that's the two pricing strategies, right? And again, in what selling situation or what situation would you go for revenue versus profit depends really on like who you are, who your customer is, and what you're trying to sell, right? For example, if you're a new entrant to a market, your objective is to like, hey, I need to grow market share, right? In that case, you want to have like as much sales as possible. And in that case, you probably want to go for the optimal pricing strategy, right? And then if you're someone, let's just think of someone who has sort of monopoly of sorts, like they build something that everyone wants. They don't need to go for like revenue optimization. They can just go for the profit. So typically, if you are in a situation where like you're an established player, or you have something that everyone wants, or you have effectively a monopoly, you will go for price optimization. Whereas if you are a new entrant, or you're trying to introduce a new product and you're just trying to gauge a market, then revenue optimization is a relevant strategy. And to your point about like having like, can I use both? Typically, like all the customers that I work with across multiple industries, I would even say like Fortune 50s, we had to explain them like, hey, you have to go this way or this way, depending on that situation. And typically we recommend not going like full throttle in one direction versus the other. And the pricing solution I was talking about was like, again, a self-learning mechanism that could understand like, what is the strategy you need to take? Like you go profit aggressive and it's not working out, it will start dialing it down to the point where you are like, okay, let's preserve the revenue. Because at the end of the day, if you're profit aggressive, you're increasing prices, and price elasticity comes into play. If the price elasticity is applicable, in that case, your demand will start going down and you'll start losing like the bottom line.
Yeah, so that's going into a little bit about how they're measuring it, right? But so when they are building the strategy and you're working with them on it, how long would you recommend that they, choose revenue versus profit and go down that route? And then how are they measuring the progress to that journey before they might consider switching it up or changing their approach?
That is a good question. Like, what strategy you take really depends on, like I said, on the selling situation or like who your customer is and everything. But whether you take a profit optimizing strategy or a revenue optimizing strategy, it really goes back to science. there's less intuition in it. Basically, like what we used to do is we try to estimate the elasticity of products you're trying to sell. So you have some historical information. We would segment that data, cluster that data into different selling situations, which is very similar. And we'll look at the impact of price increases and decreases on the changes in the volume in the historical data over different periods of time to sort of assess like how sensitive this product is to price changes, right? Which is effectively elasticity, right? If you're sensitive to price changes, then there is a sort of a curve you can build, which looks like an inverted parabola. And you can identify like, okay, if I am like away from the optimal, and I can climb towards optimal, you can try to increase prices and be more profitable. And if you're on the other side of the profitable, like the optimal price point, then you try to walk back. So it really depends on like where you are from the optimal price point that would sort of optimize your profit or revenue or whichever thing you want. Really, I mean, it again is driven by science, and you can identify that, hey, I have started reaching a point where like I'm not profitable any longer, or I cannot push the profit because it's starting to eat into my revenues. Then you dial it back. If you're on the other side where you can increase the profit and continue to increase revenue, then you just keep dialing it up.
Okay. So I'm running, I guess, a little bit low on time here. So I want to make the last question, try to bring it a little bit full circle to, you said in the beginning, a lot of times people come to you with a problem that's more of like an urban legend. So they're not necessarily using the data to back up some of the pain points. And I think that there's a lot of trouble that people likely have trying to just get, whether it's people to believe in the data or to adopt data-driven solutions as a whole. You're working with a multitude of different teams, as you've talked about throughout this, the past like 30 or so minutes. And each one of these teams is going to come in with a different mindset in terms of their history or their track record with data, their ability to use it, etc. So how do you drive adoption with these teams when you do come to them with a new solution, in particular a sales team, just as we were talking about pricing over the past few minutes? But how do you come to them and say, this is going to help you in the long run, especially if they're not quite on board with it?
I have seen this movie like multiple times across multiple industries. It's not isolated to one or the other. So I can give examples here. So basically, but like before I give examples, like a good way to think about it is like the change that you're trying to bring to the organization, is it aligned with what you're what you're promoting, right? Like, for example, or incentivizing, right? That's the right word. So, for example, a lot of sales commission or incentive is based on like how much you sell, right? If you're trying to like incentivize, like, hey, you make 100 sales and boom, you get the best bonus or whatever, right? Commission. In that case, it's a race to the bottom. Everyone will try to price as low as possible to just get the sales quota done and get their incentive done. And this was a problem with one of my customers in the past. And we were like, hey, this needs to change. If you want to drive adoption of the pricing strategy, two things need to happen. First thing is like, you have to enforce this culture of like, why am I going into the bottom? So we built tools for our customer that could, like, if a salesperson is coming to you and saying like, hey, I need a lower price, right? You can just show like, hey, here is your selling situation. Here are like 50 different selling situations, very similar to yours. Why do you need to be the lowest one? And sometimes just making very basic things, like making them write a comment, like, why do you need a lower price? Just like prevents people from doing that. The other thing that people do is like, they will set a target price, which is usually not the least possible price that you give, and tie your incentive index to a target price. If you're below the target, your incentives go down. If you're above the target, your incentives go up. So we built that kind of system for one of our customers. One of our customers actually just made everyone write, like, if you want a price override, or go to the bottom. Why? Just give a reasoning, and usually people draw blank, and they're like, okay, let's just go to a different price point. So really, I mean, it's one of the things that like, what people struggle with and this is not necessarily to one company or one industry. It's like people think that, hey, the machine learning AI is coming to replace me. It's taking my job. The idea is like to convince or like let people see that it's there to make your life easier. You spend most of your time on the most complex problems. You have vanilla problems, you can just rely on the machine to do it for you. So it's trying to help you. It's not just trying to replace you. So that thing needs to be reinforced. And then anytime you want to deviate from like a recommendation which is data driven, like you can have some sort of argument. You don't have to do it for like the lowest dollar, like $5 stuff. But big ticket items, if you're going down, like you can kind of like showcase like, hey, I understand you have like a unique case maybe, but here is what others have done in a similar situation. And again, like it cannot be like leave money on the table. Try to get the most out of it. And again, every selling situation can be different, but like making people see that, hey, the machine is like recommending something based on these things makes sense to me. It should make sense to you. Mm-hmm. So it's really about like driving the synergy between man and the machine who is using it, and incentivizing the most important. Like just don't let people override a price because they can, or like their incentives are misaligned with the outcome you want. If you just like these are the basics, if you do that, then you'll have adoption for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I think it's a great piece to end on as well. I mean, you don't know of many businesses who year over year decrease their quotas or their targets. So if you can bring AI in and a strong data science team in to help you achieve a bigger quota more efficiently, then I think it's great. And it's really there to help enhance everything that you're doing and make your life a little bit easier so that you can hit those goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Vivek, it was great to have you on the podcast today. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed it too. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Decisions Now. Check out all episodes at evalueserve.com/podcast, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes.